So perhaps you can sort of set the scene for us today. What does the global frontier AI race look like at the moment, and how do you see it unfolding? And have you got any thoughts on how you might sort of characterise it, and where do you see the UK in that race, if at all? Who would like to start? Professor Neil, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, I think it's perhaps symptomatic and problematic of the situation we face that it's being characterized as a race. Mm-hmm. If you think of a race, I'm immediately thinking of Usain Bolt doing extraordinary things in the 100 meters, and that implies there's only one winner and a number of losers. That plays to a narrative that I think is extremely dangerous for the UK, because it's not going to be plucky Brits participating and snatching a bronze. It's going to be us targeting areas of innovation that are not in the interests of our citizens, that are not solving their problems, that are about issues that are important, but are not on the in tray of what we need to do for the UK public. And I think that the dominance of that narrative is due to a wider problem we face in this space that, if you'll forgive a bit of levity, I characterize as life of Brian syndrome. So for those who haven't seen the film, the opening of that film is characterized by a difficult situation in Judea where people are extremely nervous about what's going on. And as a result, they respond to any pronouncement of an idea as if it's the way forward. They are extremely susceptible to false prophets and confident, strong ideas that seem to give them a way out. Of course, the comedy of the film is all about a regular person being placed as a prophet who's constantly trying not to be that. And I think when we characterize the situation since the launch of ChatGPT, and it's not, I don't want to sort of pick on a particular government or individual, I think this is systematic. We see it also in businesses, where people are gravitating around simplistic ideas that we know in the long term are unlikely to provide the solutions for our businesses, for our small and medium enterprises, because it gives them a sense of tangibility and security in what is a very uncertain space. Of course, the irony is, in such uncertain times, we need to be listening to the more nuanced perspectives, the people who are saying, look, it might pan out like this, or it might pan out like that. And most importantly, and most underserved, we need to be listening to our citizens and businesses, not the big tech leads, not their ideas of what the future looks like, but the problems that our citizens face that have been problems certainly ever since the first season of Yes Minister, because they all exist in that other comedy, but remain problems today, problems in health, problems in social care, problems in security, problems in education, that we would love our small and medium enterprises to be part of the solution in solving. And I'm afraid, despite the extraordinary power of this technology, we're just not seeing the signs of that yet. And I largely say it's because instead of thinking about that and listening to our citizens, we're distracted by notions of global AI races, which are a construction, not saying there's nothing geopolitical going on, but they're a construction associated with aspects of the world that are difficult and problematic and need resolving, but they're not going to solve the problems of our businesses.
That's really helpful. Dame Wendy, what are your thoughts?
Well, I echo everything Neil's saying there. I will add some other comments. I'm very aware of the geopolitics. I've written about the geopolitics of the internet, and I'm working on the geopolitics of AI, and I do a lot in China. It is the press, as Neil said, it's not we don't want to see it as a race, but that's how people like to portray it. But we are very torn in that we can't deal with both sides of that equally. Like, we're very, very constrained, and universities as well as businesses, to work with the US. China's doing some amazing work in AI. And in fact, at the moment, they're acting as the good guys, because the US is totally against any regulation and talk about global governance. It's all MAGA. It's all, we're going to win at all costs. And the hype that comes out of the companies, because it has, since ChatGPT, been set up very aggressively as not just a race between countries, but a race between companies. And that sets us in a scenario that is so dangerous because they have to make money and they're not. There is no profit being made by these big companies. The ones that are going to win are the ones with the deep pockets that can sustain. You know, OpenAI is in deep trouble. Anthropic's going to have to do huge amounts to keep at the front of everything because they haven't got the big pockets of money that Google and Microsoft and the likes of AWS and so on have. And the hyper marketing that comes out as a result, so misleading. I was on holiday last week, but I still keep up with the news. I was on a cruise ship in the middle of the Atlantic, but there was such a lot of news about AI last week. Stuff came out of Anthropic about how we've heard this before, they cry wolf all the time. Anthropic saying that their new platform, what's it called? Their cybersecurity. Mythos, as in mythology, funny that, is too dangerous to release. Well, we heard that from OpenAI in February 2019, that their GPT product was too dangerous to release, right? And there is some element of, we're being careful and checking things, but there's also a huge element of hype. Be ready because you're going to have to buy this product, right, in order to stay in the game. Well, I could go on about that forever, but the thing for us is that what's our role in all this? When we wrote the Hall Percenti report, it was very clear what our role was, and it still is the same role, actually. When in your introduction, I don't think you mentioned education and research. Mm-hmm. We are incredibly strong. We have an amazing legacy. I mean, Neil's at Cambridge, Oxford, my university, Southampton, in agents and so on, Edinburgh, Manchester. As I said, I wrote my first AI code 40 years ago. We were teaching AI. We've been teaching it and researching in it for that long. We have some of the top research groups in the UK, in the world, in the UK. And many of the ideas, you'll hear them say, the companies, everything happens in industry. Actually, everything they're working on started in universities and started here. Right? Jeff Hinton, who got the Nobel Prize for physics, was it? He started in Edinburgh. Demis is still here, bless him, at Google. So proud of what they do. He had to sell to Google, but he still stays in the UK, and we laud him as a son of the UK. But we have this an amazing legacy, and because what we need to do is continue to train the next generation. And I'll say a bit more about China, then I'll shut up. But I always say to people, AI professors do not grow on trees. It takes a long time to grow an AI professor, and we're very good at it in the UK. And you need those AI professors to train the next generation of AI engineers, researchers. And they're the people that the Saudis and whoever else are trying to grow an industry will be after. That legacy we must protect, and the legacy of research we must protect. Then it's the applications, and we're very good at this. And I'll just say one more thing about China, which is I find it in the UK, it's getting increasingly difficult for us to collaborate with China on research. I feel like my academic freedom is being limited. We need to protect our secrets. We need to make sure that what we're producing isn't being used in a way we don't want it to be used, but it's harder and harder to collaborate with the US because they've reduced funding, and it's even harder to collaborate with China. So we are going to have to manage, and I will say one other thing, we need to talk today about sovereign AI.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Well, it sounds as though...
Just very quickly, you mentioned that you thought the Chinese were acting as the good guys in this. I just wonder if you might just explain what you meant by that.
Okay, well, what the Chinese are... you're quite right. Thank you for asking. Basically, the US is saying no regulation. It's all here. We're going to win, and you have to buy our stuff. And we have to worry about what we do with our secure data, because, we have to be careful about hosting things on US servers and all that. But clearly we have to do that with China. But China's totally backing what the UN wants to do. I can talk more about that if you want me to. And they are also making an awful lot of their stuff open source. That doesn't mean they aren't using it for military and other purposes. Of course they are. But a lot of their models are open source. And so they're going open source, and they're going, we want to be part of the discussions about governance of AI globally.
Thank you. So we don't think we're in a race, but it sounds like we've got some excellent strengths to build on. I'm going to hand over to Justin, who wants to pick up on some of these points around what the UK strengths might be.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And yeah, it's very clear the race analogy isn't a very helpful one. So we'll try not to get into crude analogies, but try and get some facts really about where you think our strengths are. What is it that we can build on in this country, and how obviously can government sort of help deliver on that?
Yeah, so when I think about this, if we want an analogy, I sort of, apologies, I prefer a football analogy. I think what we're being shared, sorry, Wendy. I think what we're being presented with is what we might see as a football tactic of balls being swung in from the right and left. There's only two ways of doing things, and we need to play creatively through the middle, and that's play with our skill base, right? So it's harder to do, actually. It requires what we lead in, what Europe leads in. And I think a major failing of UK policy is to not be looking more towards European partners and what they're doing in response to these challenges, because across Europe, what you see is a diversity of liberal democracies who have different circumstances and are responding in different ways according to their economic setup. So if you take Germany with the Cyber Valley and their large investments also in the Munich ecosystem, they are trying to focus on how they take their brownfield industry and sustain them through to an economic future where they're still competitive through government intervention. But if you look at Finland, where a lot of the innovation is greenfield, you see a very different strategy, which is focused on their lead in tech, the fact that after Nokia sort of collapsed a bit, they have enormous capabilities at the tech forefront and trying to seed more startups. Now, the UK kind of, I think, sits somewhere in the middle of this, but there's a commonality across all of Europe. We lead on human capital. If you look at the United States, it imports extraordinary amounts of human capital from China, from Europe, from India. We have approximately the same inflow and outflow of human capital. Countries like Italy are in a structural deficit in human capital, so they're educating a lot of people who are leaving. I think there's a really major question. I think we can't underestimate, despite what Wendy rightly said about the hype we're hearing from individual companies. In the long term, this is one of the most transformative technologies we're ever likely to see. If we want the steerage of this technology that goes in a way that capitalizes on our human capital and data sets, etc., we need to be steered by driving the technology in directions that actually, first of all, supports the evolution of that human capital, because capability in human capital is simultaneously a strength and a weakness, because the human capital we've constructed through education is clearly not going to be exactly the right form of education that we need in 20 years' time. That's going to change. And that means supporting workers in the workforce today to assimilate and adopt these technologies. And I'm talking in small and medium enterprises, and I'm talking specifically about the type of companies that are in the lower productivity sector. So those that have already been left behind by previous digital technologies have been felt unable to invest. I'm talking about companies who are struggling with their management. We see statistics that show that companies that are well managed will adopt the technology more quickly, so improving the education of our managers in how to build and deploy this technology. And the big danger with it is it's always all on or all off. So the typical response, and I do a lot of work with businesses, is people to be all in or all out. But just like any nuanced technology, you need a calibrated understanding. We have a massive advantage in all those areas. We have what I referred to, and Wendy's referred to it as well, as Campus UK. You know, in terms of the concentration of educational and research expertise, which you can get to by a train within the United Kingdom, we are second to almost no other place in the world. You know, the United States is very distributed in this way. We do not put enough investment in places like Southampton, in places like Glasgow. Because we're distracted by AI races, we're not encouraging our universities to engage better in their local communities, in the type of businesses that we need to be assimilating these technologies. That's not what they're rewarded for. They're rewarded for Nobel Prizes and sort of headlines on the cover of Nature. What I would like to see is a position where we're rewarding our academics just as much for being on the cover of the local paper, for the right reasons, as for being on the cover of Nature.
Okay. And anything to add to that, Wendy?
Sorry, what was the original question?
Where are the UK strengths in comparison
Well, actually,
to
I've just written down because I reminded myself what was in the Hall Percenti report, and I'm not just saying it because I was one of the co-authors. I don't think we were talking about this earlier. You could look at those. We talked about data, we talked about skills, we talked about adoption, which is everything Neil said about helping small to medium enterprises adopt AI. And we talked about leadership. And those four things, we can do all of those really well. The other thing which is happening very recently, and I like, is the assurance industry, AI assurance. This is going to get very big. We do have one of our strengths, which came out of the Bletchley Park Summit that Rishi Sunak started. He didn't get everything right, by the way. I'm happy upset, but you know, he that came out of it, and the AI now called the Security Institute came out of it. They are now we are the best, I would say, AI Safety Security Institute in the world. We're key part of, because again, this is something the US doesn't want security institutes. But it has supported part of the Security Institute setting up what's called a centre, a network of AI, I forget now, evaluation, testing and assurance, some words like that. Oh no, measurement, AI measurement, sorry, jet lag. AI measurement, evaluation and assurance. And we could really lead in the AI assurance industry. This is testing, evaluating products before they're released, because at the moment it's a wild west. The companies can release anything to the general public. It's like we're running an experiment that we can't undo. And
what are the risks of that?
Well, because the things could be dangerous, either to personal safety, company safety, national safety, and there's no testing of it. So I think, and the National Physical Laboratory, NPL, have also been funded through, I think, AC or through the DCIT anyway, to set up a centre for AI measurement. And we could become one of the real leaders in that in the UK. And this would be all about, and remember, AI is not just about technology, it's about people using that technology. So there's socio-technical aspect to it.
Thank you. Alison, just briefly.
Yes, so Damon, I just wanted to come in on what you were just saying. It's quite a subjective measure in many ways, what's good or bad about AI. But you mentioned metrics. How do you think we should look at defining what is allowed out into the world and what isn't?
There's no quick answer to that, because we don't know yet. This is an evolving science, and I'm beginning to talk about things like when I talk publicly about a science of AI and learning how to do this. I think I'm one of the people that thinks we've got time. If you listen to some of the stuff that comes out of Silicon Valley, it's all going to happen this year, and we're all going to hell in a handcart, whichever way we think about it. They seem to want it both ways. They want us to buy their products, and they want us to understand that there's an existential threat down the line. But I'm one of the people that believes we do still have time, because it isn't moving as fast as they tell us, even on jobs, which I'm sure we'll come to. So I think we have time to develop the metrics, and I think the UK could. We've already started with the two investments I mentioned. We've got AC, and we've got the work at the NPL. We could, and others looking at AI assurance. We're good at this stuff. We could really build on that, I think.
Thank you. I'm going to now turn to my colleague Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. So Justin was talking earlier and asked a question about the UK's AI strengths. I want to look at the other side of the coin for the moment. A 2025 Department of Science, Innovation and Technology sector study found that 1 in 3 UK AI leaders were actively considering relocating their bases overseas, mostly in their entirety to the US. So where do you think are the most significant gaps or weaknesses that limit the UK in terms of our competitiveness?
We're two of the three that aren't. You said 1/3. Yeah. We're staying here.
So I'm a dual national citizen, so I could have spent my entire career in the US. I think you have to be very careful about what they're defining as an AI leader. So at the moment, I think what we have what I would characterize as a sort of growth strategy around AI, all in favor of that. But that's been dominated by what I would say, therefore, is supply-side simulation. So one unfortunate thing about the UK, to a greater extent than anywhere else, apart from perhaps the United States, you see that the advice in DCIT is dominated by people with supply-side interests. So we're talking about people who can provide infrastructure, things like the US-UK surplus deal. I believe you've had a recent visit to India. I think it's an extraordinary example. I was on Doordarshan television for an hour and a half on the evening of the AI Summit, where Dame Wendy spoke beautifully. They asked me, what can the West teach about India about AI? I said, it's the other way around, that we can learn from India. That, whatever the challenges of the current government and Modi's policies in certain areas, if you look at what he's doing in terms of these technologies, it was the first time at that summit we sat in the audience and you saw the discomfort in the AI leaders as they were forced to talk about Indian people, Indian farmers, what was going on in India. What I think he refers to it as AI that works for India works for the world. And what does he mean by that? He means that India has the cross-section of citizen problems that reflect the cross-sections of problems across the world. Now, whether you buy into the sort of, of course there's some propaganda and marketing behind that, but it's an utterly different situation to what we're facing in the UK, where we're constantly hearing about AI that works for the UK is AI that works for Microsoft, Amazon, OpenAI, Google, and these other big tech companies. Our announcements are a series of announcements of deals with these companies aiming to deploy in the apparent interests of our citizens. And yet when you look at the track record of what it means to centrally deploy, what you get to, another problem that this committee has been very interested in, the Horizon scandal, where you centrally deploy a technology on people without engaging them. So in terms of our weaknesses, I think it's a weakness to be looking at outside and constantly across the Atlantic at organizations which are brilliant. We absolutely want them here, right? But by overemphasizing their contribution to what they can do for the economy, because it's not going to come from them. It's going to come from our businesses adopting and assimilating and innovating. And at the moment, there's an enormous weakness in a lack of confidence in our own people, in our own businesses and our own universities.
So on that, the confidence is one piece, but there's also a funding issue in terms of large-scale funding that's required. We've got talent pool funding, talent pool issues. We don't have necessarily the people with the right skills in the right places.
So much of this is addressable without massive funding.
Exactly.
It is addressable with a nuanced understanding of our ecosystem. Yeah. But instead of pausing and understanding what we do to encourage peer-to-peer support networks, we're in a situation, for the first time ever, we're working with local authorities in Cambridge. So we're working with our local councils. And as soon as we met them, they said, our people have formed AI clubs. They want to know how to deploy this technology. Not everyone, but there are people in the local authorities that want to do that. We work with South Cambridgeshire to build on that interest, to support them in building planning solutions that are deployed by the planning officers themselves in collaboration with the University of Cambridge and the University of Liverpool. And what do we hear 4 months later? Big announcements that Google is going to solve planning across the country, right? We are doing that for what, £20,000? But it's just about reaching out into these challenges, listening to their problems. Liverpool, I hope, will build a business on the back of that, because they've learned an enormous amount on how you can process planning allocations by working at the forefront with South Cambridgeshire. So hopefully Liverpool will get a business out of it. Now, but I did get an email on the day of that announcement saying, what does this Google thing mean for us?
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Alison Griffiths on that point.
It's a very short question. It's just to invite...
Sorry, my answers are too long.
No, not short. No, it's a short question. It's just to invite Professor Lawrence to come to my constituency and meet my local council, because I'd love to put your ideas in front of them.
We have open schemes that we've just closed, unfortunately, for inviting them in and working with us in this way. So I'll definitely give you details on that.
Thank you. Dan.
I've got far too many questions, and I know we've got such a little amount of time. I think we've talked a little bit about the the uncertainty around US tech companies, and I think there's a political imperative around understanding what that actually means. And I'd be really keen to get your perspectives on this. So we have seen owners of AI platforms show a willingness to use their stack to influence foreign governments, and we've definitely seen that. So it's a bit of a blunt question, but have we effectively outsourced our AI model development to private billionaires with zero loyalty to the British state and consumer? Or is that... Okay, yes.
And I think we have to be a bit careful that these businesses, they're not evil, but they're just incentivized in different ways. When we talk about AI alignment, are we aligning the models with the interests of our citizens, our values? But you could also talk about corporate alignment. I mean, corporations themselves are entities, and these corporations are clearly not aligned with the interests of our citizens, which is why there's such a gap between what they ask for and what's delivered.
Can I say Wendy? A bit more is that we need to...
Yeah, sorry, I didn't come here.
We
sorry,
are very
Wendy,
good friends. The sovereign, we need to think more about what we mean by sovereign AI. Because what we don't have at the moment, I said yes because that's where it is, and that's where these big companies would like it to be. But that leaves us with all sorts of problems, the things Neil's been talking about, but also in terms of training and skills. It's very hard. We need to help people to, would you call them small SMLs? SLMs?
Like
SLMs, small language models.
Small language models, which you saw in India a lot.
Yes, and in India, the enthusiasm, I can only, from the young people, there were 250,000 people at the Indian summit, but I would say half of those were young people who were so enthusiastic about how they could help people in India with AI. But we have no way of enabling people to really play. I mean, you can do it at Cambridge because you build it yourself, right? Yeah. These small small language models, which India and others are doing, to enable small organisations, local councils, to use the technology themselves without having to buy into a big platform, and also for training our students.
Can I riff on what you're saying a little bit, Wendy? Apologies. So just to sort of say that the other thing that's happening at the moment is actually about orchestration, and that's a total game changer. So many of the assumptions that people were making about where the innovation was going to occur was based on the fact you had to train these models. But all the recent headlines, OpenClaw, or the recent innovations from Claude Code, all of these technologies are so-called agent orchestration. An 11-year-old can do this. Genuinely, everyone can participate. It's a very easy thing to do. We're creating such models within Cambridge. We're using them for training and supporting our scientists. We would like to get that sort of work out into councils. And it's very possible because, as Dame Wendy was saying earlier, open source is so important in innovation. The orchestration systems are much more open source, much more accessible. Of course, they come with risks as well. They're very powerful. I would argue that what we're going to see over the next decade is going to come more from orchestration than from the individual models themselves.
Which is why we need an assurance industry. Because everybody can do it so easily, there are huge dangers there. And so people need to understand need to be able to know that what they're dealing with is safe. And that's why I think we need an assurance industry.
Thank you. John Cooper.
Sorry. No. Are we doing question 4, or are you coming in on this one?
Sorry.
So just 5. Sorry, I never got the chance to ask question 4. Apologies.
Okay.
Which was about the growth prize and what that looks like for the UK, which we have talked about to some degree. But I also wanted to ask Dame Wendy to talk about briefly on the balance of risk, to your point about China as well. So the growth prize, we've talked in quite broad terms in many different angles here, but I think that's one thing that I just want to look at.
Do you mean there's a risk in us not using the Chinese models? I think there is.
Yeah, exactly. So when you talked about the fact that you felt unable to pursue your relationship with China as much as you wanted to, I suppose the question that I have around UK growth is the balance of risk.
I would love
how we
to
manage
be able to let my students in Southampton use a Chinese open model, because they're very innovative. They are doing things very efficiently, and are innovating in terms of the way they build these things. And we can't choose to use them. We wouldn't be allowed to. It wouldn't get through the trusted research network. And I sort of understand the reasons why. I do understand the reasons why, but it is very limiting. So I just think it's like, I'm trying to think of an analogy where you would say to the world, you can only buy drugs that are produced by the American pharmaceutical industry. You can't buy drugs that are produced by the Chinese pharmaceutical industry, even if they're going to cure cancer. Right? That's the sort of analogy here.
Thank you, Chair. Professor, you talked about Campus UK and our attractiveness for AI companies. And I think we're host to something like 6,000 companies that are involved in AI. I just wonder, how attractive are we in the global scale, and what factors influence that attractiveness, and particularly the government's AI action plan? Is that something that's having a positive impact, or could that be improved?
My feeling is it was welcome, but it was a sort of minimal plan. If you certainly looked at the amount of compute that was being talked about, it was only about 3 times the amount of compute you'd expect to get just with processor improvements over the years. I worry that, again, it's the supply side, and actually the notion of an AI company is quite misleading in some sense. I think, when Wendy's talking about assurance, I think she's absolutely right, but a lot of the lessons of the innovation are going to be not worked out in an AI company that's separated from the adoption layer. It's going to be worked out by people who are coming from a domain, say a nurse who builds an AI company that supports nurses in data entry. Now, that's very localized work. The challenge we face with digital technologies historically is they're difficult to create, and then they're imposed on us in a one-size-fits-all manner, which gives an enormous amount of power to the tech companies that control the software engineers. That's dead, that model. Now you can create software trivially. Any of us in this room can talk to a machine and have it do what we want. That's a revolution unlike we've ever seen. So our notions about where the innovation will occur, that has been previously, it's centralized in a company that pays a large amount of money to a group of software engineers, we're going to absolutely shift over the next 10 years. What we're going to see is the potential that these innovations are deployed much closer to the coal face. So I think that we are competitive with AI companies. They come and locate here. We've got a bunch of people that we graduate. I think that's with all due respect, I sort of feel it's the wrong question, and it's that type of distraction that misses us from what's actually going on. Is that I believe, just as we saw with the internet, we all thought the internet was one thing. A 17-year-old Mark Zuckerberg decides it's something else, and who's right?
I wonder if that is the point, Wendy. Are we asking the wrong question here? I often think of television. You don't need to understand rediffusion to be able to change the channel on the TV. So are we looking at this through the wrong model? Are we trying to centralise control when we should be diffusing control?
Yes. Actually, it's got to come from grassroots. You talked about what you're doing in Cambridgeshire. We're doing the same sort of thing in Southampton and in Hampshire, giving people the power to do it themselves. That's all about education and training and setting up. It's becoming quite clear that what you need in every sector, in every organisation, in every company, you need AI champions, people that are absolutely trained, understand what's going on and can help the organisation, the company, the city council to adopt. And this doesn't take mega amounts of central funding, and that would be the wrong way to do it. I think we're totally agreed on this. We need to empower the grassroots.
Can I just add a brief thing on there? No. The other thing, just to say on top of that, it's often the universities that are less well known that have been doing this and not been rewarded for doing this. So I was doing the Ref Impact thing where we review what universities have done. And universities, like Bournemouth or Lincoln, are engaged with their local communities. Lincoln with farmers and farming robotics, Bournemouth with local hospitals. But they're not being rewarded under how we reward universities for doing that. So it's not just about Cambridge and Southampton, it's about every higher education institution, many of which were founded in the first place to deal with these types of challenges as they arose in the Industrial Revolution. Yet we've lost track of that. Apologies.
Thank you. Dan Aldridge.
Thank you. I'm really encouraged by the idea that that investment, we don't have to be talking in these astronomical terms in terms of to change the dial, because the £500 million investment for the Sovereign AI Fund could potentially have a significant impact. I'm hopeful of that.
Could, yes, absolutely.
What would we need to do then? What would that fund need to do for it to be impactful?
Well, I think you would go for funding people to build their own models. There was you know, there's a beginning to be a process. Clean your data up. I mean, we always talk about AI and don't talk about enough about data. And Neil and I are both steeped in the data world, and you've got to have good, clean AI. I would challenge Neil a little bit. You said something about, well, we could all do that. We could build software so easily now. We can, but you've got to check it every step of the way.
Of
These things are not, and never will be, 100% accurate.
Professional standards, Dame Wendy. Professional standards, then.
What do you mean?
In terms of having professional standards in the development of AI.
Yes, absolutely.
But that's been a problem in software already, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't assume that the AI that's being built at the moment is going to do what you tell it to do, give you the answers you need. It's not like a calculator. So it's about putting the infrastructure locally. I think there will be quite a revolution in terms of data centres coming up. There'll be smaller data centres that will use less electricity, or we'll develop the engineering required to turn a data centre into a heat supplying function. So you will all want data centres in our towns and villages because they'll supply the heat for the local area. I mean, I can see a grid, a national energy grid made up of data centres in the future. India are doing work on this already. We could we could work with them. There's so much people, organisations and companies can do to help themselves with encouragement. And that was where the adoption was going in the 4% plan. It was really about helping people to help themselves. Someone said about nurses. Was it you? Yeah, I mean, these are the sorts of things. Every hospital needs its AI champions in every sector so that you can start building it up. Central imposition is not going to work.
Oh, perfectly. We're going to come to Alison Griffiths to just round up on the final question.
Thank you. So what single government action would most strengthen the UK's competitiveness in frontier AI? And if the government does nothing, what risk does the UK face in the global AI race that we don't want to be in?
Well, if the government does nothing, then we will just slip off the radar. Right, we are living on a legacy that we need to build up and maintain. But I really don't think it's, and I say it again, about central funding for things. I would say it's about it could be funding that's distributed to the people that are going to develop the examples, the models that other people can then use. I mean, just like actually we built the web. Right? Do you remember a time when nobody knew how to build a website? And you learnt by doing following what other people had done. And you used to have to pay a fortune to build a website, and now anyone can do it. Right? It's that sort of innovation, support for innovation, that I think is absolutely crucial. And yeah, getting some good advice into government. I don't know where our government gets its AI advice from. There's a huge number of people work in DCIT, and they're all very good, well-intentioned people, but it's where they're getting the advice from. It's about what to do with the money. You know, there's no AI council anymore, so there's no independent advice, as far as I can see, going in.
Right, okay. Professor Lawrence.
So it's a great question, difficult to have the single points, but just to sort of come back, I think something I touched on in the beginning, I view this as a supply and demand thing with an innovation pipeline. We've got an extraordinary technology, and a lot of the things that have been done are great, right? But you can see that all the advice is on the supply side, and a lot of that comes through lobbying, that government should invest or will have partners that are announceable. The single intervention is on the demand side. We don't actually have to think a lot about the supply side. You know, all of these companies, they have enormous lobbying groups now, and that's grown tremendously over the last 5 years. It would be very interesting to see those figures as they've seen the potential of us as a market. So to a large extent, it's more about sort of pushing them back a little bit and leaving the space for UK small and medium enterprises. I mean, I think a very good example is, you know, supporting the CMA in what is a pro-innovation agenda and realizing that is not pro-big tech. That is pro-innovation. And the idea that big tech seemed to have carried out, that the CMA should be pro-big tech because it's pro-innovation, is disastrous. We need to look back at that and say, we have an amazing bill, the Digital Markets Competition Consumer Act, that gives the CMA tremendous powers to create a space for small and medium enterprises that are solving solutions that are key to the challenges that UK citizens have, to enact those powers without enormous amounts of new legislation or regulation, and enable UK businesses to flower.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring in briefly Charlie Maynard.
Wholly concur on that CMA comments. On the AI Security Institute, now Safety Institute, and to your point about the UN global governance on AI, just what do you think our government should be doing more of in terms of interacting with those? Because, you know, there are some big risks out there, and I'm not sure that the new government is serious enough about that. And just what pointers could you give us as a bunch of politicians on that?
Well, I would say the UK should absolutely stand up and back the global governance initiatives that the UN is taking. I believe we are, in terms of the people who do work in that area and the decent international people. And I think it needs government support. The geopolitical problem is, of course, the US is saying we don't want anything to do with it, which is the tension we have in everything at the moment, right? Can we support? But we really, really need, I believe, there's a huge gap globally in terms of governance of this area. We need standards that people will agree to in terms of testing, assurance, and just simple things like, don't we have the right to be told whether something we're looking at was produced by AI or not? You know, I mean, do we have to work it out for ourselves? As this technology gets smarter and smarter, is it up to us as individuals? It's scary for people not to know. And there are no 100% exact, but we need some assurance, sorry, I keep using that word, about what we're looking at. You know, this video, is it real or not? Do I believe it or not? And you know, of course there's hybrids, but I think we have a right to know whether something has been produced, whether the voice we're talking to is a human voice or not.
Thank you. And I want to thank both of you for your extremely enlightening evidence and the help that you've provided to this committee and helping us as we go through our AI inquiry, and for helping us to identify some of those strengths and weaknesses.
I allowed one more word.
I'm going to have to conclude the panel, I'm afraid. We are already over time. But I want to thank you very much. Order, order. That concludes this panel. Order, order. Welcome to the committee's second panel on our inquiry into AI, business and the future workforce. We know that AI's compute capacity is growing but remains well behind the United States and China, limiting our ability to train large frontier AI models independently. And as a result, many UK firms rely on overseas cloud infrastructure. To address this, the UK government has invested through AI opportunities in the Action Plan and the Compute Roadmap, and the UK has around 1.6 gigawatts of data centre capacity and 2 national supercomputers. The UK's strengths could be said to lie in data and semiconductor design, and it has valuable assets like the NHS and UK Biobank for data. There are strong governance frameworks and over 200 semiconductor firms, including ARM, a global leader in chip design. The access to energy infrastructure has been a huge issue, with examples of grid connections, such as that of Nscale in Loughton, which was only mentioned last week, with challenges with their access to the grid connection capacity. And we know that high energy prices are affecting the ability to compete globally. And the Stargate UK project has recently shelved by OpenAI, citing energy costs and AI and the regulation around AI. Could I please ask the panel to introduce themselves briefly?
Yeah, my name is Matthew Evans. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Tech UK. We represent over 1,200 tech companies in the UK. About 650 to 700 of those are SMEs, and the rest are either mid-cap or large multinational corporates.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Clinton Hasell. I'm Chief Business Officer at KO Data, a privately owned, UK headquartered developer and operator of data centres across the UK.
Thank you.
I'm Hugh Milward. I'm Vice President of Corporate Affairs for Microsoft here in the UK.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And could I ask the panel, what's your overall assessment of the UK's AI infrastructure today, and how well positioned are we at the moment to drive that growth at scale? And I don't know, Hugh, would you like to start?
Thank you, Chair. It depends on what you mean by AI infrastructure. There is a growing number of data centers. Some of them are small, independent. Some of them are essentially leased data center capacity to a number of other providers. And some of them are wholly owned by hyperscale providers like ourselves. We've had data center capacity here initially leased for around 8 years. Our model has changed, and we're increasingly investing in the data center capacity ourselves, building our own, because we can drive greater levels of environmental sustainability, greater levels of efficiency, and greater levels of innovation in our own capacity there. Does the UK have enough capacity? It depends on what we want to do with it. And I think it really comes down to what do we want to do, and do we have the capacity to do the things we want to do? And I think in your introduction, you mentioned model training, and I think that's a big question as to whether we do want to train models here in the UK. Is there a value to train models here in the UK? We have high energy costs. We have challenges around the grid connections and the timeliness of grid connections. We're planning capacity at the moment in the north of England, but we're not going to be able to switch it on at the moment until 2033, even if we could build it within the next 18 months. So there are challenges associated with that. So is there a value instead of training models anywhere where the capacity is available and where the price is cheap? It then becomes, where is the model located? Where is it inferenced? Where can it be fine-tuned? And that is a different matter. It uses different types of capacity. And so as a country, we just need to think about, well, what are the things that we need to do and right-size the infrastructure to do it?
You think that's clear enough at the moment?
It's not, because there are phrases, and it's a privilege to follow the panel before, some of the world's greatest minds on AI. But even there are different interpretations of words like sovereign. So what do we mean by sovereignty? And until we've got a little bit more clarity around what is it that we mean, and how we thinking about resilience, how we thinking about risk, what does our risk appetite look like, and what is our risk for different types of workloads, I think we're still going to have some challenge around defining what it is that we want to do here in the UK versus to have anywhere. A good example of this, Microsoft is, as you heard earlier, primarily an orchestration layer rather than a model developer. We have, through our AI services available to customers, around 10,000 AI services available to any given customer. Around, so that's 10,000 available. Around 1,500 are physically based here in the UK, where the data processing and the model itself is located here in the UK. Is that enough? Is it not enough? It depends on the risk tolerance around concepts like sovereign.
That's really helpful, thank you. Clinton Hasell, what is your assessment of our AI infrastructure here in the UK?
So in answer to the question, yes, we are constrained by our infrastructure at the moment. I think software is moving so fast, and infrastructure and our ability in the UK to deliver isn't keeping pace. And there are a number of reasons for that. Certainly, as the previous panel said, we don't lack AI talent, we don't lack ambition, and we don't lack the demand. But our infrastructure, through high energy costs, the highest in the G7, the constrained grid capacity, where we are waiting up to 15 years now for firm grid offers, where we could develop that infrastructure, but we're constrained by our grid. Our copyright laws put us at a disadvantage to locating particularly the generative large language model AIs elsewhere. Those three factors are the primary factors that are constraining our ability to grow. As Hugh said, it does come down to what kind of AI platform are we seeking to attract in this country. There is the generative AI, which is really what's driving a lot of the growth and the demand at the moment as the big tech companies train their large language models. That makes the UK very unattractive. Those kind of modelling and platforms are pretty much location agnostic. So the large tech companies will go where the economics make sense. And at the moment, that's not the UK. The inference AI, which will, over time, there'll be an inflection point, and that demand will overtake the generative AI. That has some benefit of being located in the UK because of latency and proximity to end users. But a lot of that generative AI can still sit overseas. And the challenges for the UK when that happens is we lose control, we lose access. And for small businesses and for enterprise level AI, that puts the UK potentially at a disadvantage in the future. What we're actually doing is outsourcing productivity to other nations. So the question that we pose is, does the UK want to be an AI maker or an AI taker? If we become an AI maker, we bring a lot of economic benefit back to the UK.
Can I just confirm, have you been affected by the grid connection issue? And because you said 15 years.
Absolutely.
And so one of your sites, is it that you've been quoted?
A number of sites, a number of development sites. Access to grid power is probably the number one constraint for a data center developer. It's the first question we ask when we're assessing a new site. And our campus in Harlow is an example where we've developed an AI campus in Harlow to serve Cambridge, University of Cambridge universities. We have AI platforms, small business platforms there. We have larger platforms there. We've been quoted 2037 for the next tranche of power from UKPN. Now that may come forward as part of the NESO Q review, right. But that you can't plan, you can't deliver with certainty. We have the capacity, we have the planning, land. We just can't. We don't have certainty over the power. That could come forward, and we're waiting to hear in the next 3 to 6 months as to whether that date will move forward or not.
I think, Chair, just to add a little bit of colour to that, most operators for sites face waits of between 3 and 8 years, sort of echoing what Clinton said. But there's also inherent uncertainty in some of those connection dates. And one of our members had a site within the M25 area where the connection dates slipped by over a decade. Now, these are multi-million pounds, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment. And that uncertainty without the guarantee of that connection is really hard to build in the UK.
And is that a regular occurrence?
That was probably an extreme occurrence, but that level of uncertainty where you get slips for your grid connection is a regular point that happens within the industry and within the build-outs.
Wow, okay. And what's your take more broadly on sort of like our in any way that you want to obviously give your question to
I think
sort of
you
where
know,
the
grid
UK
connections,
is.
price, copyright, I won't sort of rehash those arguments. I think just reflecting on the evidence that we've just heard, we might not be in a sprint, but we're certainly in a competition for capital at the moment. And the AI landscape isn't a zero-sum game, we strongly believe, in terms of how we deploy and adopt AI, but where we are seeing the level of capital for AI and compute infrastructure at the moment, no one knows how long that is going to last, but it's unlikely that that is a new normal. So the more we can attract the UK now, the better we will be, because as Clinton and as Hugh said, that gives you optionality further up the stack. And I think the reason that we are so good at this, and we should say we are really good at building compute infrastructure in the UK. We've got the third largest cloud market globally, the most in Europe. Part of that is because of the demand for those services from areas like financial services, from life sciences and others. The risk is that there will be demand for inferencing, for agentic AI workloads, and because of the constraints from the grid, from price, from copyright, we won't be able to service that demand, and that will have a real world economic impact on the UK.
Thank you. Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, Clinton and Matthew, you both spoke about copyright in your contributions, saying about us being an AI taker rather than an AI maker and losing control. Surely one of the fixes that you're then suggesting is for the UK to relax some of its copyright rules. Surely that just puts us as a race to the bottom and disadvantages those people who are taking that risk, who are generating that stuff and that content.
That's a choice for the UK as to what you're seeking to attract to the UK. If you want the large language models, which the inference AI platforms interface with, those large language models today are being trained in the US, they're being trained in continental Europe or the Nordics, typically where energy costs are a lot lower, where it makes more economic sense, and where the copyright laws enable that to happen. Now, that can't happen to the same degree in the UK at the moment, but the inference platforms aren't subject to those copyright laws. So what we're doing in the UK is we're benefiting from the training that happens overseas through access through the inference models. So it's a choice that we have to make as a nation, but it is constraining our ability to attract large investment and those large platforms coming into the UK.
Chair, can I add one point to this?
Yes.
So we take a slightly different view, which is that actually a restriction on text and data mining does impact your ability to fine-tune a model and to inference a model. And so if you want to be able to do both of those, you need to be able to essentially, you need computers to be able to read data.
Thank you. Charlie Maynard.
Yeah, thank you. Just running with that a little bit further. So maybe, Matthew, if you could just kind of give a little bit more detail about, obviously there's a lot of people wanting that power, some in data centers, some other AI reasons, but lots of other sectors wanting that power. Do you think there is a case as to why AI should, or data centers should go to the top of that queue or not? One. And secondly, if you had a government that was willing to take its magic wand out on copyright, what would you like to see disappear?
If I take those in reverse order, if I may.
Okay.
I think part of the challenge in the UK in copyright at the moment is we don't have a position that is now agreed and adopted and gives clarity to industry. So I think for us, we would want it to be globally competitive, and our members say that at the moment we're legally less certain than the EU, than the US, than Japan, than Singapore.
And sorry, Matthew, could you just take that apart a little bit for us? Because I mean, this is, I guess, is GDPR. This is post-Brexit, so we've got it. So where are the gaps compared to what the EU has there, which make it less certain?
I think at the moment we haven't got a settled position. That's the key point here. And I think what we want to see on copyright, if we had that magic wand, is a copyright regime that is globally competitive, that gives us clarity, and that is delivered in quite short order. And we need that in order to advance the investment in AI infrastructure in the UK.
And the EU's position on copyright is not globally competitive in that context. Is that what your
Look, members do have some challenges with the EU's approach, but I can provide you with further detail if that would be helpful.
Okay, and then on grid connection queues?
On grid connection, look, there is a opportunity, and we're working quite closely with NESO, with government, to reform the grid connection process. There are a lot of speculative bids for power in that queue. We've managed to filter some of those out, but there are reasonable steps that we could take so that when you sort of pre-qualified before entering the queue, it's called a Gate 2 process. There are reforms that we can do that will help make that much more stable, much more clear for members, and give them a better certainty to be able to invest in what are really sort of multi-million pound infrastructure investments.
Matthew, if I've got kind of AI at Gate 2, data center here, and I've got something else here, do you think there's a case that the data center should win through in that discussion?
I think we do have to look at what is nationally beneficial from a strategic economic point of view. And we want to work with local communities. I think the tech sector is really clear, and we've been clear on this in areas like planning. We don't want to override local concerns. We want to work with local communities. But as a UK, we need to look at where do we best deploy capital? Where do we best deploy some of this capacity for energy? That is largely a government decision to make. I think there is a good case to put forward AI infrastructure near the top of that queue.
And just put that into a geographical context in the UK, in terms of a lot of power increasingly is generated off the North Sea, so further north. I hear arguments about latency and the need that it's got to be a data center in the southeast, otherwise it's not much use to us. Is that a misconstruing the case or not?
I think that there is a reason that the southeast has quite a large density for cloud computing, because that is where the demand was for cloud computing infrastructure. We are seeing more demand right across the UK, so that means that there is greater opportunity to deploy AI and compute infrastructure across the UK. As Hugh and as Clinton have mentioned, it really depends on what you're using AI for. If we were in a position where you could use AI training, or you would train large AI models in the UK, then geography becomes less of an issue, and you would probably go where the energy is cheapest. That is not the case for a number of reasons in the UK. Inferencing does have a latency dependency, so distance ultimately does matter a little bit. But where you're seeing large tech clusters develop in Manchester, in Edinburgh, central belt of Scotland, then you can start to think about how you deploy compute infrastructure to service those areas of demand. Ultimately, we go where the customer and demand wants.
I think you're absolutely right. There is surplus renewable energy in Scotland, in other parts of the UK. And having a compelling reason for the platforms to locate in those geographies makes a lot of sense. But the compelling reason is probably differentiated energy costs, so that you can drive the platforms to those parts of the country where there's surplus energy, and indeed as consumers we all pay for curtailment of that energy. So it's a win-win.
Chris Bloor.
Just going back to your answer, Mr. Evans, to Charlie's question, he offered you the blank check of what you would like on copyright laws, and you very carefully sidestepped, I think, the answer of what actually you would like to see. You said you'd like a competitive position and certainty. And bearing in mind how important the issue of copyright laws are to many of our constituents and our businesses, I just wondered if I could ask you again, just to press you on what that actually looks like, because they're great words to use, but in actual reality, what does that mean?
So there's a question of whether we're working within the confines of what the government is putting on the table at the moment. I think we were quite comfortable with a opt-out TDM, text and data mining regime. I think government has sort of made clear that's no longer on the table. I think it's on us as an industry to work with the creative sector to say, well, what is that middle ground that is going to provide clarity for both sides on that argument. But I'm happy to come back to you with some more specifics on that as well.
Justin Matters.
Thank you. So I think you've probably already addressed this, but we're just keen to understand what policy levers you would like to see move to accelerate the growth of data centres. I mean, if there's, I know you've really sort of covered this probably great detail, but if there's anything else you want to add?
I think just two things I would add. One is government really needs to focus on the grid connection process and how we get greater speed of that process and how we get greater certainty within it. The second is on energy prices. We have the highest industrial energy prices in the sort of G20. A lot of that is on the non-commodity cost. I think the levy reform that government has started to look at is really important in terms of the levy framework. We are part of a broad coalition of industry associations that want government to take that forward and make sure that we aren't adding additional non-commodity costs onto energy bills. At the moment, just to give you some sort of stats, if you had a 100 megawatt data centre in the UK, the Social Market Foundation estimates that would give you a running cost on energy of about £220 million a year, compared to 156 in France, 67 in Sweden, and just 55 in the US. So you can sort of see how out of kilter we are on some of these energy costs.
Anything else to add to that, John?
Yeah, I'd echo Matt's comments there. When you look at what a customer would pay, in the UK, 50% of their costs for being in one of our data centres would be on energy, compared to 15% in the US. So that gives you kind of the ratio. I'd also like to, if I may, give you a little insight into the economics of building a data centre and how much capital is invested, by private capital, by the likes of Kao. To build a medium-sized 36 megawatt data centre is going to cost you £500 million just for the infrastructure, not the GPUs that sit and the computers and the platforms that sit inside the data, just to provide the land, the power connections, the chillers, the electrical infrastructure. So that's a huge investment that companies like Kao are making, often at risk on a 3-year cycle to develop a data center, with the customer hopefully coming on board at some time in the last year or 12 to 18 months before it goes live. So having the certainty of knowing when the power's coming is really important. Having a reasonable degree of understanding of that demand, and knowing that the UK is an attractive place for the large hyperscalers or other platform providers to put their infrastructure, gives us confidence that we can invest and build that critical national infrastructure.
Could I just ask you what you made of Dame Wendy's comments about the potential for sort of smaller, more localised data centres, whether you think that that's something that should be pursued more vigorously?
It's not an area that we're focused on. We're kind of that kind of medium size. There are localised data centre companies out there that are looking at data centres at the edge. It's not sure that, I suppose they will have the same uncertainty of demand, so I can't really comment on that part of the market.
It's interesting. It depends on what you want to do in the data center, I suppose. I think if you look at what's happened with cloud, we've gone from companies having the data in their own basements or IT rooms, and then large companies having their own essentially small data center, and you've seen that grow to see the economies of scale and the efficiencies of having those in actual larger data centers with multi customers. We're building data centers now of 300 megawatts. In the US is a gigawatt, and so these will get, and you get far greater economies of scale by doing that. At the same time, we're seeing another shift in terms of the way in which technology is operating, of a move to having more processing at a localized level as well. So this edge computing, that does point to a mixed environment of more localized data processing of different kinds, particularly as you look at a mix of chips between CPUs, GPUs, and new inferencing chips. So you can do different workloads at different points of what's required there.
And are there any security aspects to those considerations as well?
It's an interesting question because it's quite easy to conclude that local is more secure, or within a national boundaries or borders is more secure. Actually, more secure is more secure. The way in which you define resilience and you build programs of resilience will create your resilience. So is there a security risk associated with a mixed environment? We would say no, there isn't. We're not complacent, but at the same time, we invest. I don't think there's a company that invests more in terms of their cybersecurity within our own networks and systems, and that cybersecurity is universal, whether your data is in the US, the UK, on a device or in the cloud.
Thank you. Alison Griffiths.
Thank you. Matthew and Clinton, both of you have given graphic descriptions of the costs of energy. I think, Matthew, you said that we are the highest in the G20, not the G7. You said the G20. I just want to make sure whether you meant
G7. But,
okay, I just wanted to clarify that. How do the costs of compute and data center operations compare internationally? And I'm quite keen to hear not just energy costs, although I think the description, Clinton, that you gave of 50% in the UK versus 15% in the US is pretty graphic on that. But we know that the cost of doing business for all sectors in the UK is going up. Can you give me a sense of where the UK sits internationally in that, and what needs to be done to make us competitive internationally?
Yeah, I think I'll go first if I may, and it's worth reflecting on sort of the impact that this does have. We poll 500 business leaders, but split between tech sector and non-tech sector, to look at both supply and demand each year, and energy costs has been seen as a top 2 barrier to greater investment in the UK in both segments for the past 4 years. So it is having a material impact on the UK economy. What we see is that we are increasingly seen as an outlier on energy prices, and that has an impact in terms of compute, but also in other areas. There are many reasons why building a large semiconductor fab in the UK may be difficult, but energy costs would be amongst them as well. So it is not just sort of one part of the network. It affects telecoms networks and sort of the whole digital stack, really. So it is a big issue. As I said, I think we are really focused on levy reform. I think the government has opened that up as a conversation, and we work across a number of different industries, because this is a economy-wide issue. It is not just a tech sector issue, to look to see how we can drive that forward. But I would say certainly levy reform is a sort of top priority within that.
Clinton, would you like to add anything to that?
I think it's not just the data center industry that's constrained by high energy costs. It's across many industrial sectors, so that's just the nature of the UK at the moment. I think to Matt's point, addressing the levies, but also shifting the demand, or pushing the large data center campuses that are very energy hungry to the parts of the UK where there is surplus renewable energies, and we can make use of that at a lower cost, a lower cost, because that makes economic sense across the board.
And do you find that the wider cost of doing business over and so I accept everything that you've just said on energy costs, and I've spoken on it many times in the House of Commons, and I'm absolutely behind you on this. I suppose the question I'm also quite keen to understand is the wider cost of doing business. So in terms of taxation, in terms of hiring people, are those costs also putting off investment in the UK?
I think if you were looking at the other costs associated with running a data centre or developing and building a data centre, they're probably fairly comparable across the other markets that London, UK competes with Germany, France, Netherlands, etc. within Europe for attracting the large platforms. It's energy that's the key differentiator. The cost of building data centres is fairly common across those locations.
So I think
You would. Sorry. I will come to you here.
Sorry to interrupt. I think just back to that polling piece. This was the first time actually that energy costs wasn't number one. It was number two this time, but it was the regulatory cost and level of taxation that was seen as number one barrier across the sector as a whole, not just on data centres. Referencing Clinton's point around build costs.
Thank you for clarifying that. Hugh.
The only thing I would add to that is that more than energy costs, the constraining factor, as we see it, is the capacity. It's the supply, it's the capacity. And at the moment, the pipeline of energy supply is such that we can't do all of the. I mean, we as a country can't do all of the things that we want to do. So we've got some trade-offs to make, and some of those trade-offs will be around data centres and about what kind of workloads we're able to do. We are not able to stand up a 1 gigabyte data centre in the UK. So there are some things that you can do in some countries that we won't be able to do in the UK. And that could be just fine, which means that we do need to right-size our ambitions for what we want to do with technology and data centres to the supply of energy that we've got.
So can I just, to the sort of second part of the question, which is what should we be doing about that? I don't want to put the words in your mouth. Perhaps you can tell me what you think we should be doing about that to fix that.
We should be. We should be investing in a wide range of new capacity, including green. It's absolutely certainly for us as a company that will really only buy green energy. Then that's a fundamental, but also a mix of including nuclear and other types of provision.
Thank you. Antonia?
I just wanted to follow up the point that you made, Matthew, Mr. Evans, on energy costs. Are the sectors that you represent those that might benefit from the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme, or is that not the situation for your industries?
It is not, unfortunately. There's a glorious thing called SIC codes, which I'm sure members of the committee are more than familiar with.
Many people have talked to us about SIC
yes, codes. They are not absolutely representative of the economy as we see it today. I think, can't quite remember the date that they were updated, but we're talking sort of pre-internet days that the last update was done. And therefore, entirely reasonably, the government has chosen to base some of the criteria for this off industry codes, and we fall outside of those. So we have engaged with the Minister on this point, and happy to provide you some more evidence on it, but that is unlikely to have an impact on the tech sector as a whole.
Okay. And your preferred policy solution for energy costs is the removal of policy costs and loading onto general taxation, would you say?
Broadly, yes, to some extent. Okay. I think we see, we've had a number of levy control frameworks which have failed because we've continued to see levies being added to unit price of energy. We think we need to review why they have failed and then take action actually to start to reduce those costs.
Thank you. Thank you. John Cooper.
Sure. AI rests obviously on super sophisticated chips. At the end of the day, very specialist items, things like field programmable gate arrays and things like that, which of themselves are new and novel. What do you think about the British position with access to these kind of things? First of all, we're all going to start with you because you mentioned the chips. Have we got access to what we need in an era when some countries are restricting access to these things?
At the moment, we'd say yes. I mean, this is a global shortage of chips that is under challenge from what's going on in the Middle East as well, and access to helium and other kind of materials that are essential for silicon. The UK government's actually been pretty canny in its desire to buy forward, essentially, in certain modern new designs of chips, including specialized inferencing chips, and that makes a lot of sense. One of the questions to your previous panel was around, how might you spend sovereign? I mean, a certain amount of investment in these kinds of chips for various specialized uses is a sound concept. But again, there's a global shortage of chips, so this supply is.
Should we be addressing that? Should we be trying to onshore production of these? Is that possible? I've been in Taiwan, and they're very clear in Taiwan that they are streets ahead of most people, and that's not easily replicatable. It's not something you can just create overnight, an infrastructure like that. So are we talking about races here? Are we at the races with this, or should we just give up on this idea?
Yeah, I don't have a simple answer to that. I mean, what I would say is that we've got a global interdependency on a number of different parts of the tech supply chain, but other supply chains as well. And generally, we've been quite happy to date with that global interdependency. The UK, for example, is very advanced in terms of chip design. You've got some countries that are very specialized in terms of chip manufacture. If every country nationalized or not nationalized, brought into its own borders all aspects of the supply chain, I think you'd see massively increased costs. So it becomes a trade-off as to, well, what aspects of that does a country deem to be essential to invest? The UK is very well positioned in terms of its trade relations with the kinds of countries that are strong suppliers of this kind of infrastructure. And so we actually feel that the international agreements that are in place at the moment are sufficient for the UK's demand.
Mr. Evans, do you think that we're in quite a good place?
I'd echo Hugh's comments really about that global interdependency. I think the UK government has been quite forward-looking for a number of years in terms of signing some quite useful trade agreements. So the Hiroshima Accords with Japan, for instance, again focused around semiconductors as well as other chips, and we've seen some similar trade agreements. But we have to recognise that we are very good in one part of that stack. We're really advanced in terms of chip design, as Hugh said, IP. We do have some niche capability around compound semiconductors, and we have some very small chip manufacturers as well. But the economies of scale that you get, particularly in Southeast Asia, are what actually drives the low cost of chips globally. There is a pent-up demand for those, which it is leading to some increased costs at the moment. But we have seen that sort of flow through, particularly during COVID in the past couple of years, and I think we've got a little bit better at managing some of those supply chains as a result of some of the shocks of the last couple of years.
Thank you. Final question, Dan Aldridge.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify something. So there's obviously stumbling blocks in accessing the national grid. Is the national grid doing what it needs to do to support your industries?
Happy to take that one. I think, look, National Grid for a number of years wasn't able to build ahead of demand as well as it would probably have wanted to. And I think we're seeing some of the sort of long-run impacts of that. Where I think we want to see more clarity around the grid, and it has gone through a number of changes over the last couple of years, is really where grid connections are given some greater certainty that those dates are going to be held to. I think that would sort of allow us to invest with a bit more certainty, reduces the cost ultimately of that. But I think that the grid connection reform is the bit that we really need to crack now. And we have been working very closely with government, with NESO on this. So I think, what we need to see really is that enacted and driven through now, and be able to put that process in place so that when bids are getting into the system for grid connections, we know that they are viable. They've potentially got a customer, maybe they've made a financial commitment of some sort. It increases the chances that that is going to go ahead, and makes it better for everyone that is looking for a viable grid connection. So I think we need to deliver, but I think we've got over the hurdle of what that looks like and what the solution is.
It's not as bad as it was.
I think the desire is there. It's the pace at which that's happening. So everybody, I think, understands the challenges and how we've got to this position, but it's being able to kind of move forward at pace so that we can, deliver the infrastructure and capture the demand that's out there.
I mean, a good example of the challenge that we face. We are maybe 2.5 to 3 billion pounds into a project, which was due to come online at the end of 2026. because a electricity substation that was on track to be upgraded has not been upgraded. We're now not able to get that full supply for another 18 months. And during this next 18 months, we are obliged to turn off the data center in its entirety with 20 minutes of notice. So that's given the investment that we've made, that's a pretty unsustainable situation for us.
This is National Grid's fault.
Well, but I think National Grid, to echo the points made earlier, the will is absolutely right, and the dialogue that we've got as an industry now with National Grid and with NESO is extremely strong and extremely positive. And there are a series of factors that have resulted in this substation not being upgraded that are challenging. But these are very real. These are very real implications for this kind of delay.
We've scratched at something that I want to talk about more, but I know we're out of time. So
Thank you. And thank you to the panel for all the evidence that you've provided today and for your time. It's been extremely helpful and certainly shining a spotlight on some of these very difficult and challenging parts to your businesses and to the sector as a whole. So that concludes this panel. Order. Welcome to the panel. And this is the committee's third panel of the day into our inquiry for AI business and the future workforce. The UK is Europe's biggest market of $230 billion, but late stage and scale-up capital are cited as an issue for UK AI firms, and a third of all venture capital in the UK has been raised by AI startups. Data centres, as we heard in our last panel, can cost £500 million and take up to 15 years to get off the ground. And the British Business Bank has earmarked £25.6 billion for startup, scale-up and strategic investment. I'll be asking the panel to introduce themselves in a moment. Do you think that this is enough money, or do we need more to retain firms, talent and attract investment and be more competitive here in the UK? Perhaps if you could start and introduce yourself.
Sure. Nice to meet you all. I'm Simon Menashe. I'm a partner at MMC Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital fund, and that means we back companies quite early in their life cycle, typically within the first 1, 2 or 3 years after founding. Then we work with them over maybe 5 to 10 years as they raise scale-up capital and hopefully become very big companies and expand abroad. In terms of the... Sorry, do you want to introduce, or should we go with the question?
Do introductions and I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Okay, so my name's Phill Robinson. I'm a software guy. I've been in software 38 years. Spent two terms in Silicon Valley, second as CMO of Salesforce.com, Salesforce. And then more recently, I have been CEO of 3 software companies, 1 venture-backed and 2 PE-backed software, more significant PE-backed software companies in the UK and Netherlands. And I'm here as the chairman of Boardwave, which is an organisation we set up 4 years ago, deliberately trying to create the ecosystem benefits that exist in Silicon Valley in the UK and Europe. And we now have 2,500 members. They're all CEOs and leaders of software companies in the UK and Europe, of which 1,650 are in the UK. They get the benefit of being part of the program in terms of networking, personal development, coaching, and sharing best practice across those companies to help them scale.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Karim Palant, I'm Director of External Affairs at UK Private Capital, which some of you may know as the BVCA. We represent the private capital industry in the UK, so that's predominantly venture capital, which is the early stage investors like Simon and others, private equity firms as well that are acquiring majority stakes in more mature companies and growing those for the long term and investing for the future. Private capital in the UK backs 2.5 million firms that employ 2.5 million people, 7% of GDP, 13,000 companies across the UK, including a couple in Tamworth, Calitherm and Experienced Energy Solutions, who are excellent. It's all right, I've got more where that came from. So.
Thank you very much. I'd be extremely pleased to hear more about them. I'm going to go back to Simon Maneshi. So where are we with our situation with funding and capital? How are businesses feeling? What's the state of play?
I think today, if you're in the top 5% of exciting growth AI companies in the UK, there's an almost infinite amount of capital available for you. Most of it doesn't come from the UK. Once you hit the growth stage, it's about 85% of that capital is coming from non-domestic sources, but there's quite a lot of capital to grow. I think at the very early stages, there's now a lot more capital than there was 5 years ago, and I think particularly the expansion from the government of the British Business Bank's mandate has been very helpful. We're seeing a real step change in the kind of pace and urgency there around funding, both funds and directly companies in the early stages. I would say as our companies start to scale up and we start to look at emerging winners and the companies that are candidates for becoming the UK's best global businesses of the future, that score, which probably starts with a 10 out of 10 for talent and a 7 out of 10 for early stage funding, starts to drop quite quickly, both in terms of funding and in terms of the way that some of the other government support schemes and different services available to startups start to fall off or start to get conflicted, which we can talk more about. And then I think right at the very large end, once you start to talk about IPOing a company or supporting very, very large private companies, the score drops quite a lot further, and we have a fairly non-functional IPO market in the UK, for example.
Okay, thank you. Phill Robertson, what's your take on
Well, we deliberately focus on scale-ups because that's been the issue for a generation.
Mm-hmm.
So we have not created globally significant technology businesses for at least 20, 25 years. Much of it is some of the things that Simon said around access to capital, but also as a consequence of that, founder confidence, access to a single European market or a US market, which our colleagues have, which we don't. So there's a number of issues which mean there's sort of this plateauing of technology companies. They've got great support for starting up and getting going, and then as they begin to scale and get some size, that support falls away. And so that's the challenge, which is access to capital is one thing, but there's a bunch of other things that they need as well, which is one of the reasons to start Boardwave, which is access to talent, access to capital, access to markets. And capital is one thing which I think the government has done a lot of good work on, but there's more to do. And so an example would be Mansion House Compact, which is 5% of their funds into UK private investments. I'd like to see what progress they've made so far against their deadline of 2030. I think they're at 0.6% right now, and also it's not targeted. So I'd love to see the ability to target some of that money into AI and technology because it's more broad at the moment. So things like that are making a big difference, but there's things we can do to improve it too.
That's great. Karim Palant, I think you started off by saying that Tamworth was an AI growth zone and leading the way. So perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on that and then go further.
Unfortunately, I don't get to announce those. I think that's the Minister, Kanishka, who gets to announce those. Look, the UK is, outside of the US, one of the largest hubs of venture capital and growth stage, private equity and so on investment in the world. We should be hugely proud of that. Across the UK, there are around 140,000 people that work in that private capital ecosystem. A majority of that in London, but actually spread across the UK. That is a huge asset to the UK. It has a big impact on that early stage capital that we're talking about. So when we're talking about the 8,000 or 9,000 venture capital firms that are invested that exist in the UK currently that have been backed, those have been backed often at early stages by UK venture capital firms. once a firm needs a check size of maybe £50 million to really grow and start to commercialise their business and to start internationalising themselves, we see about almost 95% of that capital, of those checks, are coming from international venture capital funds, and predominantly US. And the reasons for that are, we have great early venture capital ecosystem that's showing returns. It's showing returns for the people that are investing in that asset class, but it's not getting the capital from UK domestic capital sources, UK pensions. I think I've mentioned before that we think that about 16 times more pensions capital, forget all the other types of capital, but 16 times more pensions capital goes into UK venture and growth equity and private equity from international pension funds than from UK pension funds. So international pension savers represent about 22% of all the investment into UK venture and growth equity. UK pension savers between 1 and 1.5%. So we're massively missing out. As people who've got pensions in the UK, we're massively missing out. We're missing out on those returns from those great companies that we've talked about already, and which we're going to talk about more. And actually, that capital would allow funds like Simon's and others to grow and to become larger funds that are going to invest at that later stage. That means we're not going to get 95% of those checks coming from US and other international venture funds.
Do you have a view as to why it is that there is more capital coming in from abroad into the private markets than there are from the pension funds here in the UK?
So we've just spent 2.5 years since actually the previous Chancellor announced and almost 3 years since the previous Chancellor announced the first Mansion House Compact, and there's been the Mansion House Compact, the Mansion House Accords, the Sterling 20 since then. And we spent 3 years talking to the pensions industry, we did something called the expert panel, which ran for 2 years, which was a deep dive into what was preventing causing that mismatch between UK pension investors and the private markets. And there were a whole range of kind of practical solutions that came out of that. Regulatory barriers, so requiring pension funds to look to cap the prices at which they were able to pay fees, because obviously active investment in growing businesses costs more in terms of fees, but when you net the fees away from the returns, it's still it's a much better deal for the pension saver. But those kind of regulatory barriers were in place. You then have other things, for example, the way the market competes at the moment, it competes on cost. So effectively, if I'm an employer and I'm wanting to get a pension firm to come and to basically run the pension for my employees, I'm looking at cost, and I'm not looking at what's the best outcome for my retired savers. There are people that I have private sector pensions that were agreed for me by a HR person at a former employer of mine. I wouldn't even know who that person is. So when I retire and my income's not sufficient, how am I going to go and find them and say, hey, look, that wasn't right, you made the wrong decision? It's never going to happen. So the accountability, but if they went for an expensive upfront cost, someone's going to turn around and go, well, that looks expensive. And that's the problem we have right through the system. And a swathe of reforms have been put in place. The pensions bill, which is going back to the Lords next week, the government has, we think, very welcome, pushed back on some of the amendments from the Lords and is continuing to make progress there. We strongly support that. I think that's hugely important, because scale within the pension sector is such a vital part of getting this right. It's the expertise that those pension funds don't have in investing in this kind of stuff that they need.
Right, thank you. Would you like to add to that?
I would, thank you. If you split the UK pension industry into the defined benefit and the defined contribution part, DB is almost a lost cause from a perspective of investing in innovation and venture capital, because of the switch away from equities and risk into bonds and fixed income, and that's partly appropriate as the average age of a holder of those pensions has aged, and that is the largest part of our pension universe, as you know. Defined contribution is the great opportunity in our universe, where you have a flow of capital in every year into those pension schemes. A lot of the holders are in the parts of their life where they should be getting exposure to riskier assets that should have a longer term, higher return. And we're now seeing signing up in the right language within the managers of these pension schemes. The oil tanker is beginning to turn, but it's turning quite slowly. And I think there's a lot of wait and see happening in that market. And part of the wait and see is, what are the leading lights in the market doing? And we're seeing pension schemes operators like Phoenix and Aviva, who are actually now flowing hundreds of millions into our sector. But a lot of the wait and see is a wait and see of, will it be watered down And will it be delayed? And can we just not do anything for a while? And do we really have to bring in that expensive expertise into our teams? And I think part of the job of government at this stage is not necessarily to launch new pressures and new schemes and mandate different things. It's to really keep that pressure up and reiterate constantly that it's a policy objective and an imperative for the country that the pension schemes are investing more in innovation, because the prize is absolutely enormous, and we could be doubling the flow of capital into not just venture capital but into infrastructure financing that's relevant to our space, and other forms of private capital that are lending and investing in startups through the pension schemes in the UK alone.
Thank you. John Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. If a pension scheme came to you and said, we want to put money into AI, which areas of AI would you recommend that they look at? Where do you think the biggest potentials for growth are? Is it the frontier companies, the big players in this, or is it vertical solutions which are very nuanced and task specific, if you like, or is it the infrastructure, is it the data centres? Where would you say the growth is going to come from?
I think the pension schemes, if they're doing their asset allocation job properly, they'll have an allocation already into big global technology companies, and that will cover foundational models run by Google and OpenAI and so on. Within the UK innovation and UK private capital allocation, I would be recommending that they think about the adoption of AI within the enterprise, both in the UK and in other Western markets, and how we can be the premier seller of those solutions into that sector. So that means AI companies that are focusing on financial services sector, on the health sector, on the life sciences and biotech sector, cybersecurity companies that are making sure that as all of that happens, we don't all get caught out by all the problems that AI is going to introduce into our
Karim, what's your thoughts? Where are you placing your bets?
I think one of the things that we would say to in specific answer to the question around a pension fund is that actually part of the skill and expertise that the pension funds need to invest in this space is that ability to diversify and that ability to bet on actually an asset class rather than individual funds too specifically. So selecting funds, diversifying across different asset classes, different types of strategies within that asset class is a really important part of the expertise. So it's not just about let's pick a fund that's going to invest in a particular type of the really cutting edge AI upside, although that's super important if you find to select managers that are in that space, but also across the range of kind of the mid-market private equity, across the range of sort of early stage growth companies from sort of later stage kind of Series C, bigger, larger funds, as well as those sort of seed and early stage funds. I think
the bet. So Phill, what's your thought on that? Yeah. That spread bet, is that the idea?
Yeah, so I think if you ask me the question, where should we be focusing our AI strategy in the UK? I would say not in frontier AI. I think that ship sailed. The cost of compute, the cost of power, the availability of power makes it incredibly difficult. But there are areas where we are strong, which aren't on that bleeding edge. Going back to Simon's point, which is in the area of applied AI or the orchestration of agents with AI. So in fintech, in biotech, in pharma, in specific sectors where we've got domain expertise, we understand the regulation and local customs. They're possibly global markets that are not big enough or have the big enough target addressable market for Anthropic to go and try and undermine us. So we've got real expertise and real skill in building industrial software and business software in specific individual niche markets, which we're really good at. One thing I would say is, what is an AI company is a question that I wanted to just tease out, because we talk about AI companies. We've got an entire industry of software businesses that have been around a while. They're scaling nicely, doing pretty well. They've moved to the cloud over the last 5 or 10 years, and they've got great expertise in some of these things, but they're not considered AI. And what they have to do is transform and migrate to being AI first companies, because otherwise they'll be disrupted. And so we have to make sure that we protect the software industry that we do have, which has been around for a while and has revenue and customers and credibility and success, and help them to migrate to AI, because otherwise we'll only have the fledgling startups at the beginning of that journey. And we know that as these companies grow, there's a mortality rate as they get bigger and bigger, and eventually, as we say, there's a plateau. So there's a whole industry of companies that have the ability to take advantage of AI if we give them that opportunity. And I think that is AI first companies and software companies that could become AI first.
I think if you don't mind, I think that we're seeing on the venture side in terms of the scale up, where the scale ups are coming in, is very much in that sort of that applied AI side. That the kind of application level within the UK is somewhere where we're extremely strong. One of the things is speaking to a few venture investors ahead of this session. One of the things that actually we have in the UK, which is actually an understanding of some of the sort of regulatory complexities of working within a different market to the US, for example, where we actually have a bit of a moat there in terms of the way the UK kind of understands the EU regulatory space. It's something that, for example, if you go back 10 years, the FCA sandbox created a real opportunity for fintech in the UK because there was that sort of regulatory that understanding of the regulatory landscape meant that when you're building tools that you want businesses to use day to day, and they're going to want to have that assurance that this tool is one that that fits with the kind of broader culture in the UK, the regulatory oversight in the UK, that's a real opportunity. And especially given that the regulatory kind of history between the UK and the EU, that market is there for us if we get that right too. If you look at the government's research on tech adoption and AI adoption for mainstream businesses, actually one of the major barriers is that sense of not knowing the sort of regulatory the kind of confidence that an AI tool is going to have regulatory kind of support or is going to get you into some kind of trouble, whether it be data assurance or whatever. So knowing that is it gives us a real market. It also gives us a challenge in terms of tech adoption within the UK, which is a separate question.
Can I just add one more comment? Is it possible?
Briefly, yes.
One of the other things I would say is we are in this country, in UK PLC and private sector, addicted to American software. And so if you think about financing or supporting UK AI, we spend something like $20 billion a year, or £20 billion a year on technology in the public sector. Nearly 90% of that is on American technology. In private sector, it's about 110 billion, of which 60 to 70% is American technology. We have to find a way to prefer our own technology, because funding a company through its revenue line is much better and easier than funding as an investor. And there's a lot of money on the table there that if we had the right policies in place, we could really help those businesses to grow and be successful if we preferred our own technology. And in public sector, I think we make it very difficult for local suppliers to bid. And so they basically opt out because they think that some large American companies got more feet on the street, more lobbying power, more ability to win the bid, and so they don't bid, and so you sort of repeating cycles. So we have to find a way to break that, because there's a lot of money at stake, which is not just investment money, it's actually revenue.
Thank you. Chris Phill.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I need to declare an interest that I know Karim from a previous life, so just wanted to put that on the record. We've heard from the previous guests about the constraints, the infrastructure constraints, etc., on AI growth moving forward. Can you give us the perspective from the investment side, what you think the constraints are on AI growth in the UK? I'll start with you, Karim.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the constraints that were talked about, and it's good to see you again, Chris. I assume you're. Don't know after 20 years if you're still doing the goalkeeping, but the
parliamentary football cap.
I mean, what I'd say is the energy cost question, which was a thing in the last panel, is huge. The regulatory piece, which I think is look, we've got things like the Regulatory Innovation Office, the Digital Regulatory Cooperation Forum, which has been around for a while now. They show kind of attempts to sort of avoid some of that overlapping regulation you might find when you're trying to build a company and effectively, who effectively is going to judge whether you're kind of causing an issue or whatever. We do have decent infrastructure in place within the UK, but it continues to be a challenge. That market access question for software and for technology is less of an issue, because ultimately software is fairly global, but it is definitely the case that knowing where you're going to be able to sell to is a massive part of growing a business. That piece of government as customer is huge. We definitely have in the UK a challenge where early stage investors, they're taking on a certain amount of risk, right? You're accepting that the product may not work at a very early stage. You're accepting that in fact the market, there may be another competitor that emerges that does well within that sector, and in the end you may lose out, and so on. So there's an element of risk with venture in early stage investing that's kind of baked in, but you're kind of having to make an assessment as to if there is a market for this capability, full stop. And if it's government is your customer, that can often not be clear at all. You know, so you don't even know if there's going to be a market for this in future, never mind whether you're going to win out or whether your product's going to in the end work. And so those kind of extra layers of uncertainty apply to government procurement. That plays out within life sciences, it plays out within defence, tech. There are large areas where government is going to be a big customer, and that does play into the way in which which sort of puts a ceiling on some of that ambition. I think ultimately, fundamentally though, it's that capital. It comes back to the scale of the venture funds saying, I'm going to put 50, 100, 500 million into this company and we're going to go global. And that is the point at which a lot of UK businesses start to look at their options.
I think one of the points I wanted to sort of tease out was this idea of access to market. So for the last number of years, US software companies win out because they've got a single local market to sell into before they ever think about the complexities of international, which allows them to scale quickly. And in Europe, it's a very fragmented market, right? So we have to sequentially go from one country to the next and sort of scale. So if you look at our members, a good US software company takes about 10 years to get to $100 million of revenue turnover. In the UK right now, it's 15 years. And 15 years is a combination of some capital issues, but also the market. No doubt the UK is the best place in Europe to build an AI business today. But at the same time, there's a lot of initiatives going on in the EU to make that more attractive. So there's EU Inc., there's Regime 28, which removes the legislative barriers for setting up a company. They've also got a very large scale-up fund that we don't participate in. And so I would encourage us to try and find ways to participate in some of those programs, because if we don't, we could find some of our AI companies and our technology businesses moving headquarters to that environment because it's a better place to be, because it's a bigger market. So we need access to markets as well.
I think the key thing I'd emphasise on our access to market is we sit in this fantastic place as a two-way bridge between the US and Europe. And we are of Europe, broadly defined, and the way that a pension fund, when I speak to them, who's thinking about allocating capital, they don't think about allocating capital to the UK or to UK AI. They think about allocating capital to the US or to Europe, or to maybe there's a third category. It used to be China, it's not anymore. And we're selling Europe, including the UK, all the time. And part of the sale there is we've got this fantastic talent base, we've got amazing universities and all the other advantages that we've talked about. But companies are not quite as highly valued as they are in the US. There's not as mature a venture capital and growth scaling market. And that's actually attractive to these pools of capital. And the opportunity to invest in UK companies that are going to have access to the European markets, but are also going to expand into the US and potentially have the opportunity to win in the US is really, really attractive sources of capital. One of the problems we have is that the various schemes that we have in the UK, whether it's tax policy, visa policies, or other support of startups, sees that act of expanding into the US as you're successful as a hostile thing, a point at which to withdraw and challenge and maybe treat as fraudulent various of the things that we would have done in the previous years to support those companies. The companies that have raised capital under the EIS schemes start to get a letter from HMRC saying, well, you're not a UK company anymore. We're going to invalidate that thing that we did 3 years ago. The Home Office starts to say, well, hang on a minute, you can't access this particular type of talent visa because you look like a US company. So set up a UK subsidiary. Okay, but HMRC says, well, hang on a minute, if you've got a UK subsidiary, we can't issue shares under the EMI scheme, which is the options that we're able to incentivize startup employees with. And so each of these schemes starts to break down the minute you take a startup that's here and you make it mostly here and also a little bit over there and winning. And that's not actually a kind of law or policy problem. It's an enforcement and HMRC stance and a Home Office stance kind of a problem. And I think one of the ways in which the AI opportunities plan was very good is saying, well, there's certain categories of potential winners that we should be supporting in different ways. The trouble is we have sort of antibodies of state in the implementation layers that kind of actively do the opposite. And one of the opportunities, I think, under the opportunities plan is to start to figure out, well, how can we give the best companies maybe a smooth path through some of that complexity? How can we unwrite some of that implementation detail that causes all these problems? And I think that's a sort of cross-government department issue, but not necessarily we need new laws and we need new policies issues.
Karim, did you want to just come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, to echo everything that Simon just said about those particular pinch points, but I wanted to just pick up on Phil's point about the European project. The UK historically pre-Brexit was predominant when it came to this sector, and when it came to venture investment and so on. That we remain easily the leader within Europe when it comes to this type of investment, but our lead is under pressure, and the reason why it's under pressure is twofold. One, we have made decisions ourselves to kind of that have made ourselves less competitive in various ways, or cut ourselves off from various things. But in particular, Europe is getting its act together, and it is seeking to get its act together on some key things. Phill mentioned the Scale-up Fund. They have a Scale-up Fund of 15 billion euros, which is all for scale-up businesses, so later stage businesses. Until quite recently, the British Business Bank wasn't even allowed to go into to play in that space, and that we can choose to participate in that. We can choose to try and match it. We can get involved. But it is hugely important that the BBB has the renewed mandate from the spending review, because it at least puts us at the races. That's important. The second thing is on the 28th regime. At the moment, one of the things that effectively insulates us from competition to some degree from the European Union is if you're set up in a company, a startup in one of the 27 member states, you've still got 26 other regimes to deal with, and so actually our disadvantage from having startups set up here in London from being outside the European Union is lessened. If that regime becomes a reality, that's great news for the European tech ecosystem, and as Simon says, that's great news for our industry, because people see that as a European industry, but for the UK specifically, it's potentially an issue.
Thank you. Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. So I suppose the question about growth capital and late stage capital is one that we've touched on already. But when you're looking directly with the US, where do we need to get better at that late stage growth capital in the UK? And how can resources such as British Business Bank, we talked about pensions already, but others look to help impact that?
So when you look at the amount of venture money that's raised in the UK, I think of the funds that we raise, 20% of it is invested in late stage scale-ups. The US is an order of magnitude more, and it's 33%. So I think from my numbers, in the UK, in scale-up land, software companies and technology businesses, about 43% of scale-up money has come from the US. The challenge with that is, great that we can attract that inward investment, which is fantastic, but often what they will then say to the founder is, and would you now move to the States? Yeah. And would you move your business? And we then become the exporter of the skills, the talent, the value, and the tax to the US. It's gone. So the challenge is, yes, we like their capital and we're happy for them to invest, but how do we make it in an environment where they don't expect to just grab the asset and move it to the US?
Well, and what is the answer to that question then?
well, I mean, I think, you know, if you look at the British Business Bank, they are an anchor LP in UK VCs. Could there be an anchor investor in US VCs in return for not requiring that those companies they invest in the UK be moved domicile? Doesn't it? I mean, just as an idea.
The scale of fund that the BBB had a mandate to back was for a long time sort of effectively capped. That, since the spending review has been removed, so they are backing bigger funds, which is really, really important, because essentially what we've got to get into the UK is the flywheel that the US has had for much longer than we have had. So as you build a software business, you exit the software business, or you sell, you realize some of the gain from your investment, you use your experience of building that business to build another one, or you use it to invest in a VC fund, or to build a VC fund to invest in others. And that sort of flywheel effect has been playing in the US for much longer. So we have seen bigger later stage funds emerge with experienced founders and investors in them. We in the UK have used things like the BBB to help generate a really strong ecosystem in the UK. We've built our financial services strength has allowed us to build a great ecosystem here in the UK, but it will take time for that flywheel to kick through, and the longer it takes for us to kind of really turn in those giant companies to get those people exiting and reinvesting, the harder it is. One thing we have is we have a tax regime here in the UK which makes it harder relative to the US and other places for people to stay, exit their business here in the UK and reinvest that money. We've made things like capital gains tax and business asset disposal relief or entrepreneurs relief less generous for people who are exiting those businesses over quite a long time. We think that one of the things you could do is, without necessarily relitigating those broad issues for all entrepreneurs and so on, is if you are reinvesting that money into UK venture capital, and if you are reinvesting that money into UK scale-ups and startups, or putting it into your own second business once you've exited your business, can you defer or reduce your requirement to pay some of that capital gains tax to reinvest it into the UK ecosystem? Is there that's something that the Swedish do, that the Estonians do. It's something that we could do here in the UK as part of the consultation that the Treasury ran post the last budget on entrepreneurship. We strongly advocated for that. I think that will be a really positive signal, because one of the things I would also say is narrative is so important for the UK. There has been a sense of the UK falling behind, having great opportunities, all the things, everything's in place, but we're falling behind. If we can kind of almost sort of send a shockwave into the system to say, no, the UK is here, it's open for business, that would be a really good way of doing it.
I would just add that the flywheel effect is real, and it's really, 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 really important. I lived in Silicon Valley twice. The density of talent and their ability to share knowledge and experience is super important. And this ability, once a company's gained and been successful and leaves, we lose the talent, we lose the experience, we lose the people, and we don't build the flywheel. And so that was the Boardwave experience, what we created in the first place, was to create this experience set and this group of people that could help each other. So that flywheel effect, don't underestimate it, it's super important.
No, I'd echo those points and say that we've got lots of soft advantages here. A lot of our CEOs that expand into the US and move to New York or to Austin to grow their businesses, they don't really want to live in the US for the next decade, actually. And in some cases, they'd be quite happy to be there for a period and come back. We make it really difficult for companies to hold on to wealth that's being gained here by the founders, by employees, and not move it elsewhere. We have portfolio companies of ours, such as Synthesia, for example, that are actively extracting AI talent from Silicon Valley and elsewhere, bringing it to London. And we want to have a tax regime that allows those people to succeed along with the companies they're helping to build here, and then stay here, and not, as soon as they leave those companies, feel they need to move back out of our jurisdiction again. And I think that flywheel effect, we just haven't had time for it to happen, but it won't happen on its own with this much friction in the system.
Thank you. Antonia Vance.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask, I was struck by the comments about the potential for UK focus on applied AI in specific sectors where we have expertise. I think that was your point, Phill. But I wanted to ask more broadly about the availability of finance for those companies that need to bring AI into their existing operations. I wonder if Mr. Palant, you wanted to start.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm thinking in particular of the likes of Purity soft drinks in your constituency, for example, who have private capital backing, and who where you would want to see that kind of investment in established businesses that are in mainstream. In that case, soft drinks. Making the kind of mainstream sort of investments into turning around those companies. I looked this morning at the government's research into tech adoption and AI adoption within mainstream businesses. Now it was said it was updated in 2026. Some of the data looked like it was from 2025, but it suggested that 1 in 6 mainstream businesses in the UK had in some way implemented some kind of AI within their system. That puts us, and I think there was some PwC data that puts us sort of something like 12th out of 19 of the countries they looked at for AI adoption within mainstream businesses within the UK. The Chancellor in her May's lecture talked about wanting to be the fastest at a tech adoption and AI adoption within the G7. To get that to happen, we're going to have capital going into mainstream businesses, we're going to have expertise going into mainstream businesses, and we're going to have access to some of the best technology. They're going to have access to guidance and information. One of the things that the research showed was that businesses were saying, actually, knowing where a use case, not even knowing what a use case is for this technology was one of the major barriers. So it might cost me money, it might get me into regulatory trouble, and I don't quite know what it's going to do. But for those companies that had done it, productivity was the massive big benefit that they found from it, and that is a big challenge for the UK economy. When you look at our private equity members, which is when we surveyed our private equity members, so a slightly different group of people to the venture members, they said that within the first 100 days of acquiring a business, they put 60% of them said that they put in place a tech adoption and an AI strategy for those businesses, and they did an assessment of those businesses for that strategy. If you think about 100 days from within acquisition, the majority of those companies that had adopted AI in the government research said they'd been considering it for a year. Many of them said they'd been considering it for 3, 4, 5 years. If we want to get to that fastest G7 number, we're going to have to move quite quickly, and that's going to need taking some of those lessons from those companies that have adopted it, whether private equity backed or not, and it's going to be about signposting where the use cases are, where the productivity impact can be, what are the options that for you as a business, a small and medium-sized business. It's business support, whether it's targeted by sector or whether it's targeted by region or whether it's targeted, but there is a huge need to get out there some of that basic information for mid-sized businesses that don't necessarily have that information to hand or even understand the use case, because our members, our private equity members, see that the value, the productivity impact straight away, and they're going in and doing it. And I think learning some of those lessons is going to be hugely important. It's not something the UK has historically been particularly strong at.
I think I would add to that in terms of mainstream businesses in the UK. The research I looked at, some government research, I think, was around 80% of no plans to implement AI at all. Maybe that's I don't know, it's a little older than the data you have, but it's a huge number. And so and I think the government's done a lot of work actually on education and building programs to educate people and free training. We've got to find a way to incentivize them to invest in AI, because they will become more productive and it will generate innovation, it will generate growth. So I don't know whether it's politically astute for me to say this, but you used to have R&D tax credits. Whether it's a system like that or not, something that incentivizes people to invest in AI for productivity and innovation might be the stimulus you need to get the broad and medium-sized businesses, small businesses, to use AI to give them lift-off.
I think there's a question of who will do the AI-ification in this conversation, and I think by and large it's going to be the UK software and AI native software companies and software companies of the last 10 years who are adopting AI quickly that we were talking about before. And I think fundamentally, we heard in the first panel around, there's a lot of self-adoption happening. You can have someone right on the front line build an app, and we can all speak into Claude and have it create something for us. And I think there will be a lot of that. But I think once you get to a certain complexity of business, it will require AI vendors that come in and say, we've got this vertical applied application that we've built for you as a buyer and for your industry and your particular use case. And those are the kind of companies that the UK, to reiterate, is very good at founding, very good at supporting, and we have a decent base of scale-ups even from the previous generation who are becoming AI leaders. And I think it's those sorts of companies that, if we support them, are going to do the AI transformation within the wider economy. It's probably not going to just be the big consultancies or a self-build.
Dan Outridge.
Thank you. Albeit pre-Brexit, when Demis Hassabis sold DeepMind to Google, a big selling point of keeping it in London was proximity to European talent. Is there how do we take advantage of some of the options we have now with a potentially uncertain US environment, and you alluded to some people potentially wanting to be here? What does the UK government need to do to make sure that we take most advantage to continue to attract the best talent that we can to the UK?
I think given the structural advantages we have in a lot of ways, and the fact that people want to come and live in London, we could do with a bit more, banging of the drum. And Macron is very good at standing up and saying, come to France, build your AI company here, we're going to give you this and support you like that, and we're going to champion everything. And we're a little bit embarrassed to do that in this country. We actually have a lot of the schemes, as we talked about, and there's a number of global talent schemes and innovative founders visa schemes and so on. I think startups often don't know how to access them, and SMEs often don't know how to access them. But because of a lot of the barriers that I talked about, even when they do know that they exist, it's quite hard to channel those visas and the schemes to the companies that are creating the most jobs and creating the most growth in those spaces. And I think the government is already has a number of policy levers through which it's picking, which startups do we want to really support, and which growth companies are going to be the champions of the future, and which venture funds are we funding through the BBB. Those things are not necessarily joined up with, okay, well, how do we funnel the tax incentives that already exist, and the visa routes that already exist, and the R&D tax credits that are quite hard to access but already exist, to those companies backed by those funds, or to the companies that we're supporting. And I think that's one of the things, together with a bit of drum banging, that we could be doing. I don't think it's necessarily about, we lack the visa routes. And I think a lot of this is your world, Phill, a lot of the talent that we've brought in over the last 15 years into our growth company sector in AI and in software has been, American executive talent, European, all kinds of talent, but particularly technical talent, and then a lot of technical and engineering talent from Asia and elsewhere. And we've got the balance, not that bad actually in terms of different sources of talent, but getting it into the right companies fast and without overly complicated schemes and without overly high rates to pay on all sorts of small things. That's where the gumming up happens.
It was definitely, when we were in India with the committee, the vibe was very different. We've got the vibe a bit wrong, I think, absolutely. Phill?
I mean, some of the marketing points I totally agree with. I think we need to bang the drum a lot harder in terms of the environment that we have here in the UK. We've done a really good job of that in the last few years. Talent has come from India, it's come from Asia, it's come from Europe, it's come from the US, as well as stuff that's homegrown. My concern is geopolitics, which is, does that get threatened? So do we find that the EU gets its act together and the Europeans go back to Europe and the Asians go back to Asia and the US goes back and we end up with something lesser than we've got today. So I think there's a threat as well. So we need to hold on to the people we've got as well as being an attractive place to work. Some of the marketing would really help. There's lots of policies and schemes in place. I think some of them don't know how to use them or how to access them. So making that more obvious would be good. But I think we're doing a pretty good job with government support. But I think just helping them understand it and then banging the drum and making sure we keep these people in the UK and not leave.
Yeah, I think, is the UK an attractive place to come and grow a business? Relative to many places, clearly yes, because a lot of people do it and have done it over many years. Has that changed over time? I think relatively our lead has eroded over time for all sorts of reasons. But there are loads of really strong reasons why you might want to do it. Some of the schemes that the EIS VCT schemes, the EMI being reforms that have come through, the talent, the universities, the legal system, the regulatory certainty, etc., etc., etc. There's loads of good reasons to do it. The vibe at the moment is more negative, and some of that is a bit about kind of a lot of speculation that around kind of where the future might have gone at various points over the last few years, and a sense, the sort of some of the fiscal challenges and so on. And I think if we can get that tone right and that mood music right, that can shift. And that's one of the reasons why, for example, getting the big bang kind of pensions reform right, getting the scale-up reinvestment relief that we talked about, getting a sense that there is actually momentum here and that the government's really focused on this, could have a real impact quite quickly. And I think that's extremely important. Things like the AI Opportunities Action Plan really did send a signal, but there is then a kind of a pressure on to kind of deliver and to be seen to be delivering. And something like energy costs is just such a big challenge.
Helpful, thank you.
Thank you. Charlie Maynard.
Hey, hi. I'm going to, if I may, ask one question to each of you, but a different question to each. Simon, Professor Neil Lawrence was pretty active earlier, saying how he didn't much like the government's new encouragement of the CMA regime, which has been widely reported as basically going easy on big tech. From the kind of UK tech sector, if that is indeed the case, do you think that's good news, bad news, or indifferent for the UK tech sector?
I don't have a strong view. I think a lot of the changes there have been shaped by tech, interpreted as big tech, and the startup scene doesn't really get much of a say in, I think, the way that the policies change in that area and the way that the CMA operates. I think when we think about the arc of funding startups, helping them to grow, raising money and becoming large, what happens right at the end is very important in terms of is there an exit opportunity for that company? I think France did a great job 20 years ago of killing its nascent startup scene for quite a few years by squashing a few potential acquisitions on the grounds of national sovereignty and competition and so on. We've managed to not do that yet, although there's been some danger with things like the AI sovereignty requirements around certain selling companies that might be considered sovereign AI capability or national security issues. And then I think around the question around IP ownership and we published some research earlier this year around the balance between kind of the opt-out and the opt-in regime around tech companies being able to use data to train their models. And I think what we're seeing in that area is a change right now where there's a third way emerging, where there's a number of tech infrastructure providers that are creating the opportunity for people to create different kinds of gates, to sell, to monetize, to create selective access.
Not so much on the, I think less on the CMA aspect, but Karim, just following up on Dame Wendy, she made the point: so few women in AI and in tech and in private capital, QED. What can UK private capital do about that, and what do you see as some of the solutions there?
Absolutely, yeah, and this is something I know that I've written to the committee about before, and it's something that we're very concerned about and focused on as well, and would absolutely share that concern. The numbers over the last few years of women in, I would draw sort of three different groups of people. One is founders and those setting up companies. One is VC investors themselves, and one is the investors in the VC funds. And I think those are three different groups. The numbers on the VC funds themselves started in the late 2010s extremely low when we first looked at the numbers, and they remain very, very low, but have at least moved somewhat in a better direction in terms of seeing those that are at the more junior level move up the chain within the ecosystem. But we still see a preponderance of men running VC funds, and that is driven by a massive range of factors, but is clearly not sustainable. One thing the government is doing, and which we very much support, is through the Investing in Women Code. There is a fund of funds designed to invest in and back women-led venture funds, which we think is hugely valuable and positive, and we think that's a very good step. I think there are we take responsibility to measure and to survey and to publish this data regularly, to hold the industry to account on it. There's a suite of sort of mentoring and training that you need to put in place. It's a very, very challenging area, and one which we're very, very focused on. Another area which is we've published since I wrote to the committee actually is on the limited partner investors, the institutional investors, where again it is a slightly better picture, but still not great, around the institutional investors that invest in funds who are making those investment decisions as to which funds to invest. And again, there is a big skew, albeit slightly less than at the venture end. So that's something we'd be very happy to follow up with on that data. That's something we collate as part of the Investing in Women Code data. What we also find is, by the way, that the investment in women women-backed founders is much higher amongst signatories of investing in women code. So and there are often firms that have engaged with some of the mentoring and some of the other programs, and we'd be keen to promote that to as many people as possible.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Phill,
a brief
so Phill,
time
so UK AI Opportunities Action Plan. I'm just quite intrigued that the government very naturally is talking about UK AI opportunities. Do you think there's enough discussion and interest in the threats?
Is there enough discussion on threats? No.
And what do you think we should do about that?
I think we need to engage more comprehensively with these companies than we have so far. I think we haven't heard enough from them. Some of them are fledgling AI companies that are just starting. Maybe Simon's been supporting them. Maybe some of them are scale-ups. I've got 1,650 members in the UK. By the way, 550 of them are women founders. So we have a real focus on supporting women and women in business and women in software, because frankly we're terrible at it in the technology industry. So they need support. Anyway, I think we need a better dialogue or a deeper dialogue with the people that are running these companies. They were all running relatively small companies compared to the US big tech. So they don't have access and the capital to spend money lobbying government for policy changes. They don't have the time to spend in these sorts of offices. We need to make it really easy for them to tell you what the issues and challenges are, much easier than it is today. And they would all say to me, yeah, it's really difficult, Phill. I'm not sure we can do this. It's going to take too much time. We're too busy with our heads down running the business. So if we can find forums and ways to do that, that would be really helpful.
Thank you. Dan Aldridge, briefly.
Startup Coalition have been doing a great job. They came to Western-super-Mare and did a roundtable on this very issue, so they were fantastic, and they're in that space. It's awesome. So, which specific policy levers, tax incentives, R&D support? You probably answered some of this, but which ones would have the greatest impact on scaling UK AI firms? And are there any things that you think that we should be pushing government to do better on?
I think the R&D tax credit system for AI investment would make a big difference, both across all industries, but also specifically in the software industries that are migrating. So software companies migrating their technology base to AI have to make a significant investment to do that, to make that shift, and if they don't do it quickly, they won't be here any longer. So we'll lose our software base in the UK, which is so important to us. So I think that for me is the most important one.
I've talked about the scale-up reinvestment relief, which is about that flywheel, which is about people who've exited businesses reinvesting into private capital in the UK and reinvesting in scale-ups here in the UK. I think we would say that is a targeted, quite relatively small fiscal impact that's going to drive quite a big behavioural change in terms of exited founders and those exiting investments going back into the ecosystem and reinvesting it into the flywheel. I think that's really important. Just thinking about, for example, Plant Force Rentals in Western-super-Mare, who've been backed by BGF, who, they're the kind of mainstream normal business that you would want to get also incentivised and motivated and supported to adopt more of that technology as well in the mainstream economy. And I think that's something that, getting investment into that sort of mid-market PE that invest in them, but also the broader business ecosystem to get supported to adopt that technology is also really, really important. And some of the ideas that Phill might put forward and others are really important there.
I think it's keeping the shoulder to the wheel on the Mansion House reforms and pensions funds investing in this space. I think it's trying to figure out how do we keep channeling the schemes, the incentives and the visas that already exist to the companies that are creating the most growth and creating the most jobs in this part of the economy, and ungumming the problems that exist. And then I think it's government getting more specific about how it can participate in that by becoming a bigger customer, thinking about procurement requirements and so on, which is part of the AI Opportunities Plan, but has got quite a lot of fleshing out to do before it really becomes really impactful.
Thank you. I accidentally asked this question, I'm so sorry.
Ms. Floor, would you like to add to that?
No, because they're answering.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time today and for your incredibly insightful information. It's going to help us to build our inquiry as we gather more information over the coming sessions. So thank you for your contribution and for your time. That concludes this session. Order, order.